I'm 99 years old. I've spent more than 60 years watching people make money and lose it. I've sat in boardrooms with billionaires, and I've watched middle-class Americans struggle paycheck to paycheck. And I've learned something that the financial industry doesn't want you to know. The difference between the people who build wealth and the people who stay broke has almost nothing to do with how much money they start with. It has everything to do with 5 patterns of behavior. If you're starting this new year with less than $50,000 in savings, listen to me. What I'm about to tell you isn't theory. It's what I observed for 6 decades. Before we begin, understand this. I'm not giving you financial advice. I'm sharing observations from a lifetime of studying wealth. Consult licensed professionals before making investment decisions. What worked historically may not work in the future, but human behavior, that never changes. And that's what we're talking about today. Let me tell you something that haunts me. I once said the first $100,000 is a bitch, but you got to do it. I don't care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. People thought I was being harsh. I wasn't. I was being mathematical. Here's what most people don't understand about that first $100,000, or in today's terms, that first $50,000. It's not about the money itself. It's about what crossing that threshold does to your psychology, your options, and your future. I watched this pattern repeat for 60 years. The people who got to $50,000 were fundamentally different from the people who stayed below it. Not smarter, not luckier, different in how they thought and what they did. And here's the thing that most financial advisors won't tell you. Getting from zero to $50,000 has almost nothing to do with investment returns and everything to do with behavior. You're not going to invest your way from $5,000 to $50,000. The math doesn't work. Even if you got a 20% return every year, which is unrealistic and unsustainable, $5,000 would take you years to grow to $50,000. No, you're going to earn and save your way there. And that requires understanding the 5 patterns I observed in every person who successfully made this journey. I met a man in 1987. I won't use his real name, but let's call him Robert. He was 36 years old, working as an engineer, making about $62,000 a year. In today's dollars, that would be like making $155,000. Sounds comfortable, right? But Robert had $8,000 in savings. That's it. He had a mortgage, 2 kids, and the sinking feeling that he was falling behind. He came to me, not for investment advice, I don't give that, but asking what I'd observed in people who built wealth. I told him about the first pattern, the milestone mindset. Most people look at the gap between where they are and where they want to be, and they freeze. Robert had $8,000. He needed $100,000 at minimum to feel secure. That $92,000 gap felt impossible. So I told him what I'd observed. Successful wealth builders don't think about the final destination. They think about the next checkpoint. For Robert, that wasn't $100,000. It was $20,000. Just get to $20,000 first. Everything else can wait. This is what I mean by the milestone mindset. You're not climbing Mount Everest in one push. You're climbing to base camp first, then to Camp 1, then Camp 2. Each checkpoint is achievable. Each success builds momentum. Robert did something smart. He automated $800 a month into a savings account. No thinking, no deciding, just automatic. After his paycheck hit, $800 vanished into savings before he could spend it. At that rate, he'd have $9,600 added per year. Combined with his existing $8,000, he had hit $20,000 in 15 months. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 months in, Robert had saved an additional $2,400. He now had $10,400 total, and something shifted in his psychology. For the first time in his adult life, he had 5 figures in the bank. It wasn't much. It wasn't retirement money, but it was proof. Proof that he could do this. Proof that the system worked. Proof that he wasn't destined to live paycheck to paycheck forever. This is what I observed happen at the $10,000 mark. Again and again over 60 years. Crossing from 4 figures to 5 figures creates a psychological shift. Suddenly, you're not broke anymore. You're a person who has money. Your identity changes. And when your identity changes, your behavior changes. Robert became more confident at work. He negotiated a raise. He started thinking about side income. He stopped seeing himself as someone who would always struggle and started seeing himself as someone who was building something. 14 months after we talked, Robert hit $20,000, just like he planned. But now, the next milestone didn't feel as impossible. He set his sights on $40,000, then $60,000, then $100,000. He reached $100,000 in 4 years and 3 months from the day he started with $8,000. How? That brings me to the second pattern. Pattern 2 is what I call breaking the income ceiling. Here's a truth that makes people uncomfortable. There's a limit to how much you can save, but there's virtually no limit to how much you can earn. Robert was saving $800 a month, which is aggressive. That's $9,600 per year. Even if he cut his spending to the bone and saved $1,200 per month, that's only $14,400 per year. At that rate, getting from $8,000 to $100,000 would take over 6 years, assuming 0 emergencies and perfect discipline. But Robert understood something I'd observed in every wealthy person I ever met. They focused more on increasing income than on cutting expenses. Now, don't misunderstand me. I lived below my means my entire life. I drove old cars. I lived in the same house for decades. Frugality matters. But frugality without income growth is just slow poverty. Robert worked as an engineer. He was good at his job, but not exceptional. He was paid fairly, but not generously. So he made a decision that most people are too afraid to make. He invested in himself. He took $3,000 from his emergency savings and enrolled in a specialized certification program in industrial automation. It took him 6 months of studying at night. It was hard. He had 2 young kids. He was tired after work, but he did it anyway. 3 months after getting certified, Robert leveraged that credential to switch companies. His new salary, $78,000. That's a $16,000 annual increase. That single $3,000 investment generated a 533% return in the first year. Over his career, that certification probably generated over $400,000 in additional earnings. This is what I mean by breaking the income ceiling. Most people accept their salary as fixed. They think, I make $60,000, so I need to figure out how to live on $60,000 and save from that. The wealthy think differently. They think, I make $60,000 now, but how can I make $80,000 next year? What skill can I learn? What value can I add? What can I become better at? I've watched this pattern for 60 years. The people who build substantial wealth always focus on increasing their income through increasing their value. Not through working more hours at the same rate. That's just trading time for money. But through becoming more valuable, learning skills that are rare, solving problems that are expensive, positioning themselves where compensation is higher. Robert didn't stop with one certification. Once he saw the return on that investment, he became addicted to self-improvement. 2 years later, he learned project management, another salary bump. Then he learned basic business strategy and started leading larger teams. Each skill compounded the value of the previous skills. By the time he was 42, 6 years after we first talked, Robert was making $142,000. His income had more than doubled. But here's the critical part. His lifestyle hadn't doubled. That's pattern 3. Pattern 33 is the lifestyle defense system. This is where most people fail. They get a raise and immediately their expenses rise to match it. Economists call it lifestyle inflation. I call it financial suicide. When Robert's income went from $62,000 to $78,000, he faced a choice. He could upgrade his house, buy a nicer car, take more expensive vacations. His friends were doing exactly that. His neighbors were doing that. Society told him he deserved it because he worked hard. But Robert remembered something I told him. Every dollar you spend on lifestyle is a dollar that can never compound for you. It's gone, forever. So Robert made a different choice. When his income increased by $16,000 annually, he increased his lifestyle spending by $3,000. He took his family on one nice vacation. He bought a few things they needed. But the remaining $13,000, that went straight to wealth building. His savings rate went from $9,600 per year to $22,600 per year, more than double. And he barely noticed the lifestyle difference because he still improved his life, just not proportionally to his income increase. This is what I observed in every person who successfully built lasting wealth. They widened the gap between earning and spending as their income rose. Most people keep the gap constant or even shrink it. If they make $50,000 and spend $45,000, that's a $5,000 gap. Then they get a raise to $65,000 and they spend $60,000. Still a $5,000 gap. But the wealthy think differently. They make $50,000 and spend $40,000. That's a $10,000 gap. Then they make $65,000 and spend $43,000. Now it's a $22,000 gap. Same lifestyle improvement, but the wealth building gap more than doubled. I lived this way my entire life. When Warren and I were building Berkshire Hathaway and becoming billionaires, I still lived in a modest house. I still drove regular cars. People thought I was cheap. I wasn't cheap. I understood mathematics. Every $1 million I didn't spend on a yacht was $1 million that could compound at 10, 15, 20% for decades. That $1 million became $10 million, then $20 million over time. That yacht? It depreciated to zero and cost me money every year to maintain. This isn't about deprivation. I lived a wonderful life. I had everything I needed and most of what I wanted. But I didn't confuse wealth building with consumption. They're opposites. Consumption feels good for a moment. Wealth building feels good forever. Robert implemented what I call the 70-20-10 rule. When his income was $78,000, he lived on 70%, which is $54,600 annually. That covered his mortgage, food, insurance, everything his family needed. 20% went to wealth building. That's $15,600 per year going straight to investments. 10% went to skill development and career growth. That's $7,800 per year invested in becoming more valuable. As his income grew to $90,000, then $110,000, then $142,000, he maintained the same percentages. By the time he was making $142,000, he was investing $28,400 per year in wealth building. That's more money going to investments than his entire salary was when we first talked. This is the power of the lifestyle defense system combined with income growth. You increase what you earn while keeping lifestyle increases modest. The gap explodes. And that gap is what builds wealth. But here's what most people miss. They focus on the investing part. They want to know which stocks to buy, which funds to choose. What's the perfect portfolio allocation? That's pattern 5, and we'll get there. But first there's pattern 4, and it's the one that made the biggest difference in Robert's life. Pattern 4 is what I call the skill compound strategy. Let me tell you about my own life for a moment. I didn't just study law. I studied mathematics. I studied psychology. I studied physics. I studied biology. I studied history. I read constantly, across every discipline. People thought I was just intellectually curious, and I was. But there was a practical reason. I understood that skills and knowledge compound in ways that money can't. If you learn accounting, that's valuable. If you learn accounting and psychology, you understand financial behavior. If you add statistics, now you can analyze patterns. If you add communication skills, you can explain complex ideas simply. Each skill doesn't just add value. It multiplies the value of every other skill you have. I called this building a latticework of mental models. In practical terms, it means don't just get good at one thing. Build a combination of skills that makes you uniquely valuable. Robert was an engineer, good at technical work. But technical skills alone have a ceiling. There are thousands of engineers. What made Robert different? After his automation certification, he learned project management. Now he wasn't just an engineer. He was an engineer who could lead projects. Then he learned basic accounting and finance. Now he could understand the business side, not just the technical side. Then he learned presentation and communication skills. Now he could explain technical concepts to non-technical executives. Each skill made him more rare, more valuable, more irreplaceable. By year 6, Robert wasn't competing with other engineers. He was in a category of one. An engineer with project management skills, business acumen, and executive communication abilities. Companies fought to hire him. He had leverage. This is what I mean by the skill compound strategy. You don't just invest money in the market. You invest in yourself first. Every dollar Robert spent on education generated returns that no stock could match. A $2,000 course that led to a $10,000 salary increase? That's a 500% return in year 1, and it keeps paying forever. I watched this pattern repeat across 60 years. The people who became wealthy invested heavily in their own skills before they invested heavily in financial markets. They understood that the best investment, with the highest return and the lowest risk, was investing in their own capabilities. Now let's talk about pattern 5, the Anti-Fragility Foundation. This is the pattern that separates people who build wealth from people who build wealth and keep it. I've watched thousands of people make money over my lifetime. The 1990s dot-com boom created paper millionaires overnight. Then 2000 came, and most of them lost everything. The 2000s housing boom created wealth on paper. Then 2008 came and wiped it out. The people who kept their wealth through every crash, every recession, every unexpected disaster, they all had one thing in common. They built anti-fragility into their system. What does that mean practically? It means you build wealth in a way that doesn't break when things go wrong. And things always go wrong. Markets crash, jobs disappear, emergencies happen. The question isn't if, it's when. Robert learned this lesson the hard way. By year 4, he had accumulated $72,000 in investable assets. $72,000. He was proud. He should have been. But here's what he did wrong initially. He had all $72,000 invested in stocks. 0 emergency fund. 0 cash reserves. He figured he was young. He had time. He could ride out any volatility. Then his wife needed unexpected surgery. The insurance covered most of it, but they had $8,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Robert had to sell stocks to cover it. Unfortunately, he had to sell during a market dip. Those shares he sold for $8,000 would have been worth $14,000 if he'd waited 18 months for the recovery. But he couldn't wait. He needed the cash. That's when Robert called me again. I told him what I'd learned over 6 decades. The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. Your wealth needs to grow continuously without being disrupted. That requires building what I call a margin of safety. Always, always keep 3 to 6 months of living expenses in cash. Robert's family needed about $4,500 per month to cover all bills. So he should have had $13,500 to $27,000 in an emergency fund before he invested $1 in the stock market. I know that sounds conservative. I know young people think they should invest aggressively. But I watched people lose everything because they didn't have a cushion. Robert restructured his finances. He built an emergency fund of $20,000. That was about 4.5 months of expenses. Then, and only then, did he invest the rest. 2 years later, he lost his job during a company restructuring. For most people, this would be devastating. They'd drain their retirement accounts, go into credit card debt, restart from zero. But Robert had built Anti-Fragility. His $20,000 emergency fund gave him breathing room. He didn't have to take the first desperate job offer. He could be selective. He found a better position within 6 weeks, actually with higher pay than before. And because he didn't have to sell his investments, they kept growing through the whole job transition. His investment account went from $82,000 to $89,000 during those 6 weeks, just from normal market movement. The Anti-Fragility Foundation has 3 components, and this is what I observed in everyone who built lasting wealth. First, maintain 3 to 6 months of expenses in liquid cash. This is non-negotiable. I don't care how good the stock market looks. You need this cushion. Second, never invest money you'll need within 5 years. If you're buying a house, that down payment stays in cash. If you have a major expense coming, that money doesn't go in stocks. Markets can stay down for years. You need time on your side. Third, diversify not just across investments, but across time. Don't invest your entire savings on one day. Spread it out. Dollar cost average. This protects you from buying everything at the peak. Robert learned this lesson well. By year 8, he had $156,000 in total assets, $25,000 in his emergency fund, the rest invested in a diversified portfolio, 60% in low-cost index funds, 30% in individual stocks of companies he researched thoroughly, 10% in bonds for stability. Not exciting, not sexy, but robust, anti-fragile. When the next market crash came, and crashes always come, Robert's portfolio dropped 32%. He watched $42,000 of value evaporate on paper. But because he had his emergency fund, because he didn't need the money for years, because he had time on his side, he didn't sell. In fact, he bought more. When the market recovered 18 months later, his portfolio was worth $198,000. The crash became an opportunity because he'd built anti-fragility into his system. Now let me bring all 5 patterns together and show you how they compound. Pattern 1. The milestone mindset. You focus on reaching $10,000, then $20,000, then $50,000. Each checkpoint builds psychological momentum. You're not overwhelmed by the distant goal. You're motivated by the next achievable target. Pattern 2. Breaking the income ceiling. You systematically invest in skills that increase your market value. Your income goes from $50,000 to $65,000 to $85,000 to $110,000 over 5 to 7 years. Pattern 3. The lifestyle defense system. As your income rises, you keep lifestyle increases modest. You widen the gap between earning and spending. That gap is what builds wealth. Pattern 4. The skill compound strategy. You build combinations of skills that make you uniquely valuable. Each skill multiplies the value of other skills. Your income acceleration compounds. Pattern 5. The Anti-Fragility Foundation. You build cushions and safety margins so that inevitable setbacks don't destroy your progress. You're positioned to survive bad times and capitalize on opportunities when others are panicking. These 5 patterns working together create something remarkable. Robert started with $8,000 at age 36. By age 44, 8 years later, he had $287,000 in net worth. How? His income grew from $62,000 to $151,000 through systematic skill development. His savings rate grew from $9,600 per year to $42,000 per year through lifestyle defense. His investments compounded at roughly 9% annually because he didn't interrupt them. He survived 2 market corrections and 1 job loss because he'd built anti-fragility. And here's what most people miss. Robert wasn't lucky. He didn't get an inheritance. He didn't win the lottery. He didn't catch some hot stock at the perfect moment. He didn't time the real estate market. He just applied 5 behavioral patterns consistently for 8 years. That's it. This is what I observed over 60 years. Wealth building isn't complicated. It's simple patterns applied consistently over time. But simple doesn't mean easy. Most people fail not because they don't know what to do, but because they lack the discipline to do it. They start strong in January and quit by March. They get a raise and immediately inflate their lifestyle. They chase hot investment tips instead of building skills. They skip the emergency fund because it's boring. They want the outcome without the process. I'm 99 years old now, and if I could go back and tell my 25-year-old self one thing, it would be this: focus on behavior, not opportunities. Everyone's looking for the next Amazon, the next Bitcoin, the next big score. But wealth isn't built on one big score. It's built on thousands of small, disciplined decisions compounded over decades. Save automatically. Invest in your skills. Live below your means. Build safety margins. Stay the course when others panic. That's it. That's the whole game. Robert is now 52 years old, 16 years after we first talked. His net worth is $1.2 million. He'll be financially independent by 60. He's not a genius. He's not lucky. He just applied patterns that I observed working for 60 years. And here's the beautiful part. These patterns work regardless of your starting point. If you're 25 with $2,000, they work. If you're 45 with $15,000, they work. If you're 60 with $30,000, they still work, though the timeline compresses. The patterns are universal because they're based on human psychology and mathematics, both of which are constant. So here's my question for you. Are you going to apply them? You're starting this new year. Maybe you have $5,000 saved. Maybe you have $25,000. Maybe you have $500. The number doesn't matter as much as you think. What matters is, what pattern are you going to implement this year? Are you going to focus on reaching your first milestone, or are you going to stay overwhelmed by the final goal? Are you going to invest in a skill that increases your income, or are you going to accept your current salary as permanent? Are you going to defend your lifestyle when you get a raise, or are you going to inflate your expenses? Are you going to compound your skills, or are you going to stay in your comfort zone? Are you going to build anti-fragility with an emergency fund, or are you going to live on the edge? These aren't rhetorical questions. Your answers will determine your financial future more than any stock pick or investment strategy. I spent 60 years watching people make money and lose it. I've seen every strategy, every scheme, every approach. And I'm telling you, these 5 patterns are what actually worked. Not sometimes, not for lucky people, for everyone who applied them consistently. The new year is a psychological reset point. Use it. Don't make vague resolutions. Make one specific commitment based on these patterns. Commit to reaching your first $10,000 by December. Commit to earning one new certification that increases your income. Commit to maintaining your current lifestyle for 12 months despite any raises. Commit to reading one book per month that builds your skills. Commit to building a $5,000 emergency fund before you invest another dollar. Pick one. Make it specific. Make it measurable. And then do it. Because here's what I learned in 99 years. The people who succeed aren't the smartest. They're not the most talented. They're not the luckiest. They're the most consistent. They do the boring work when it's boring. They stay disciplined when others get emotional. They think long-term when everyone else is thinking short-term. That's it. That's the whole secret. I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't have a course or a program or a investment fund. I'm just an old man who watched thousands of people build wealth and thousands more stay broke. And I noticed the difference. The difference is patterns, behaviors, habits, discipline. Not luck, not genius, not connections. Just consistent application of proven principles. So start this new year differently. Not with hopes or wishes, but with patterns, with systems, with behaviors that have worked for 6 decades. And maybe, just maybe, 10 years from now, you'll look back at this moment as the turning point. The moment you stopped hoping for shortcuts and started walking the proven path.